we begin tonight with the results of, or actually lack of results, from the 8-month internal investigation of the Supreme Court over the leaked draft of the decision that rolled back 50 years of precedent, overturning Roe v. Wade and the constitutional right for women to have autonomy over their own bodies. The court claims it performed a diligent search, following up on all leads, but just can't conclusively identify the leaker. Curious enough, the report indicated that the justices themselves were not scrutinized as part of the probe. In a new statement tonight, the Supreme Court marshal clarified that he did speak with all 9 justices during the probe, but unlike all the other court employees he spoke with, he did not believe that it was necessary to ask the justices to sign sworn affidavits. Well, that seems convenient, especially if you recall the New York Times report from last November, where a former anti-abortion leader within the Christian right accused Justice Samuel Alito of leaking the verdict in the 2014 Burwell versus Hobby Lobby case to religious activists. You know, the one that gave companies the right to deny birth control coverage to their employees. The Reverend Bob Shank told the Times he used that information to prepare a public relations push to allow them to get ahead of the backlash from the decision. And as you may recall, it is Justice Alito who also wrote the decision overturning Roe. Interesting. So when it comes to the Dobbs leak, you have to ask yourself the question, who benefited? Who benefited the most from it being out there? And the answer is simple. It is these right-wing religious groups that have spent decades trying to ban abortion, so they too could prepare for the inevitable backlash. Make no mistake, getting rid of Roe was not the end goal for these groups, but just the start of their crusade to control women. While Sunday marks the 50th anniversary of the enactment of the Roe decision, anti-abortion activists were in Washington today for their annual March for Life rally, and they have made clear where they want to take this American Talibanism next. We're already seeing their efforts to try to restrict access to abortion pills by going after pharmacies and providers. They now have a case before a Trump-appointed judge in Texas that could revoke the FDA's approval of a component of the abortion pill. If this judge grants the request for an injunction, it would stop the distribution of the abortion pill nationwide, even in blue states that have strong abortion protections. Now, while that decision could get overturned in an appeal, that could take months, and it could ultimately wind up at the Supreme Court. The same Supreme Court that allowed the Texas law, which effectively banned abortion in that state at 6 weeks, to stand. And, of course, the one that overturned Roe. And if that wasn't bad enough, there are now some efforts to possibly prosecute women for getting an abortion. Alabama's Attorney General said last week that anyone who uses pills to induce an abortion can still face consequences under the state's chemical endangerment of a child statute, which is a law that was made to protect children from the risks of at-home meth labs. He has since walked back those comments. But a bill introduced in Oklahoma's Senate last week would amend the state's abortion restrictions, eliminating language that clarifies that being pregnant offers protection from prosecution, which would serve women up for felony charges for inducing an abortion. A similar bill was also just introduced in Arkansas, which would allow prosecution for obtaining an abortion under state homicide laws. So like I said, Roe was just the start. Joining me now is Alexis McGill-Johnson, president of Planned Parenthood. And thank you so much for being here. It seems to me, Alexis, that the right didn't like the political result and the political backlash from overturning Roe, because the Republicans didn't really want to talk about it immediately afterward. They wanted to talk about crime and inflation and other things, and they still paid a huge price electorally for what they put in place at the Supreme Court that did that. But now they're getting aggressive. Let me read a little bit of this Rolling Stone article. This is the judge who's hearing the case about trying to ban the abortion pill. His name is Matthew Kacsmaryk. Matthew Kacsmaryk was nominated by Donald Trump and confirmed by a slim majority of Republican senators back in 2019. Despite alarms raised about his writing, he once argued against not just same-sex marriage and no-fault divorce, but also birth control, abortion, and sex outside of marriage. Advocates don't think it's a coincidence that this lawsuit landed in Kacsmaryk's docket. Several told Rolling Stone they believe the Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine, the group bringing the suit, was created for the express purpose of filing in Amarillo, Texas, in order to draw a judge whose record shows he's clearly opposed to reproductive rights. How worried should we be that the right will achieve, in essence, a national abortion ban by banning the means by which I think more than half of women get abortions?
Yes, absolutely. Well, Joy, first of all, it's great to see you. Thank you so much for having us here. Look, I mean, What did Dr. Maya Angelou say? When people show you who they are, believe them. And at every turn, they have demonstrated who they are. They want to come. They want to have a nationwide abortion ban. They're going to continue to do that. The way they're going to do that is to essentially use this court, this Kacsmaryk court, not only to turn over access to abortion via mifepristone, they're also, excuse me, sorry, Joy, all this talking is happening.
Get some water.
Out of here. It's been a long week of talking.
Live TV, everybody. Live TV. Get some water, sister.
I apologize for that. Look, they're coming after mifepristone. This same court, Judge Kacsmaryk, has a case before it to defund Planned Parenthood in Texas on some baseless claims. They have also the court that has taken up this Title X case in relationship to minors getting access to birth control. So at every turn, they are literally trying to defund access to health care across the board. So we should believe them. That is exactly what they are trying to do.
Right. I mean, they're very clear. I mean, these are people who, again, are against birth control pills. They think those are abortifacients. They're, in his case, they're against sex outside of marriage. I think that should, I guess, be criminalized as well. And they're against no-fault divorce. I mean, this is the reason I refer to it as American Talibanism is that it is about having complete control by the state over women. And they can't, and they lie, the lie that they put out there is that, no, we just want it to be decided in the states. But when it is decided in the states and it's decided in favor of women's liberty, they try to undercut that too. Dateline Kansas, which passed this surprise but overwhelming support for women to have rights over their own bodies in the state of Kansas. That referendum passed overwhelmingly, and yet Kansas lawmakers, since they can't ban abortions, have now introduced a bill that would allow cities and counties to ban abortion, despite the referendum. So what they're doing is they're saying, no, let the states decide. But they're saying, no, let the white Christian men decide.
No, completely. And my message has been consistently since Dobbs was overturned, because I think people saw that Dobbs decision as like, oh, well, now abortion is banned. They didn't understand that actually, no, the Supreme Court doesn't get the final word. We do. The Dobbs decision didn't ban abortion. It returned the decision to the states. And in every state, there's a pro-reproductive rights majority. In every state, we know that bans are deeply unpopular. They don't want to see these politicians legislate their freedom to control their own bodies. Every poll that has been released since that court decision has said that the majority of people oppose the Dobbs decision, and yet they still haven't learned the lesson that, in fact, this is not where people want to go. And so we're going to have to continue. I mean, the argument that abortion and democracy were so closely linked in the election is something that I think we continue to have to depend on to make sure that people understand this is actually democracy in action. It is making sure that people understand that the very people that they put in office, all of these lawmakers, these judges who become judges as a function of these lawmakers, state attorneys general, governors, like they all have a role to play in whether or not you have access to freedom in your own state. And so we know this is going to be another, 20, 30-year fight. But what I hope is becoming clear to people is that we actually have the agency. We have proven time and again, particularly over the last election, that we actually have the power and the history and the right on our side. And that's where I just want to, on this anniversary, really point people's attention.
Well, I mean, the thing is that people, though, have to vote for that because people are just sort of being like, I'm on Team Republican, so I vote for Republicans. And then you get things like this. In the state of Montana, the conservative leaders have sought to tighten the state's Medicaid rules to make it more difficult for low-income people to receive abortions by changing the definition of when it's medically necessary. The opposite is happening in Georgia, where I think the electorate has made it very clear they don't want Georgia to be a Florida or a Montana or a Texas. The speaker there has said, we don't want to look for anything new right now. But the consequences of what they're doing in these super red states, according to the Gender Equity Policy Institute, mothers in states with abortion bans are nearly 3 more likely to die during pregnancy, childbirth, or soon after giving birth. Restricted abortion access has been linked to an increase in suicide in young women. And these lawmakers don't care about that. They don't care about maternal death. They don't care about women becoming ill or even trying to kill themselves. They simply want control over them. And I don't know how else to say that.
Well, there's no other way to say it. It is about power and control, and I think it always has been. And I think that this is part of what we have to continue to demonstrate over through this state legislative session and into 24, where they have made clear that they want a nationwide ban. And we are already seeing the impacts, not just of the Dobbs decision, but a year before the Dobbs decision, SB 8, the impact that it's having on miscarriage management, on all of the other kind of sexual and reproductive health care that is under attack. And I think we have to continue to tell this story of that this isn't just about abortion. This isn't just about kind of saving women's lives, because clearly they are not focused on that. They're not even getting Medicaid. Under ACA, they're leaving billions of dollars on the table in each of their states in order to, to deny people access to care. I mean, they're literally banning bear arms in Missouri because of, I mean, I have no idea. I mean, like, this is what we're talking about. And I really do think that, on the anniversary of Roe, I think, and we all know Roe was already the floor, that we have to continue to have imagination that is bigger than Congress, that is bigger than this movement. That's bigger than what the opposition is trying to tell us, because they really do not understand how our bodies work and why it is so important for us to maintain control of them.
Indeed. Well, Alexis, as you know, women's bare arms are an incredible temptation to the men who cannot resist, acting upon their love, their impulses if they see that bare arms. That's just a part of it. So it's why I call them the Taliban. Alexis McKill Johnson, thank you very much.